Welcome to Comic Talkers, where comics are always the topic of our discussion. I'm Mary,
I'm Brandon. Yeah.
and we are picking it back up with our 52 book club. So last month you saw us go through issues 1 through 4, or weeks 1 through 4 of the 52 event. This time we are tackling issue number 5, so week 5 of the 52 event. We are looking at a Justice League without some of our normal key players and with some new faces and some missing faces.
Well, I think we can just jump right into issue 5, which right away starts off with one of your favorite heroes.
This is true. So as we've mentioned on this podcast multiple times now, I'm a huge JSA person. Love the Justice Society. And what we're seeing here on the first day of week 5 is that Alan Scott, who is the first Green Lantern of Earth, a lot of people incorrectly assume that's Hal Jordan. It is not. Alan Scott came first, and he is trying to break the news to Animal Man's wife that he is missing in action after going on a space mission. Alan Scott had led a team into space, as we saw last time, and things didn't go to plan.
This right away, for anybody who does not know, really quickly before we continue on the story, you gave a great description of Alan Scott. I'm going to give a great description of Animal Man.
Go
Animal
for it.
Man is Buddy Baker. He's the chosen protector of the red, the force which connects all animal life. Pretty much, you think of it, he can take the characteristics of an animal and act like it. Think of Vixen a little bit, but a little bit better. I kind of like his powers a little bit more than Vixen, but just because he's got more, he can take more of the senses because of that. It doesn't take a totem to do it. But yeah, this character has, if any recommendation reading goes to this, I know Will is a huge fan of Animal Man. Go to Grant Morrison's run. That is the only I would ever recommend other than 52.
So a few things to note about Alan Scott is that he is incredibly emotionally stunted. I say this affectionately. Alan's a wonderful character. He's not very good with feeling all the time. He's
Like,
not. He doesn't have the best interpersonal skills. He's someone who in my classroom I would say he needs some social emotional lessons. um, but he is doing his best to try to comfort Ellen Baker about her husband's MIA status, and we see her latching on to the fact that he is missing. So she's trying to hold out hope. We see that she's had a welcome home sign hung on their house for months, and that the neighbors have staged an intervention trying to convince her that her husband is dead. And they have a young daughter who I believe she says, "Dad's not coming home from space, is he?" It's one of those heartbreaking scenes, and again, it's one of those scenes that if you know Alan Scott, he has 2 children, and he hasn't always been present in their lives or a positive presence in their lives, but he does love them, and I think knowing that Buddy has a daughter at home is weighing on him heavily. And that's something we're going to see later, is this weight on Alan Scott's shoulders. But right now, we're now moving into Brandon's favorite character.
yes. So Mr. Old Good Old Lex Luthor, thought to be dead back in issue 3. Come to find out he's not. And he's out to redeem himself. And I mean redeem. I'm putting up my air quotes right now. Because he's come out with this super metagene. Now, during a radio broadcast of WGBS, Lex announces that he has created a human variant metagene, which is a biological quirk that allows people to give or get superpowers. He is such a, I would love to say a word, but I'm not going to say it. He is such a jerk. I'm going to put it this way. The way he comes about saying what he's going to say, it's just like, this is just typical Lex Luthor getting back at the superhero community. And what I love is that each scene glimpses kind of at different characters that we know. when he's saying this. He states, and I want to state this, and it goes to DC Comics, credit to DC Comics. He goes, I want to redeem myself. In a way, yes. And I'd like to be very clear about what that means, or what this means. It means we no longer have to trust our safety to the privileged elite, the accidental few. It means every man and woman can be a superhero. And he continues on by saying, Superman is gone, but here's the good news. We no longer need him or any of his kind. The age of the super citizen is dawning. This alone, you get to see different people kind of varying. You get to see Renee Montoya. You get to see Clark Kent as Clark Kent. Again, mind you, Superman is no longer has most of his powers at this point, so he's taken on that role of Clark Kent. Period. And like Mary said last time, he does play a prominent role throughout the stories, kind of like engaging the superhero community. Where this leads to, though, is Steel. Now, John Henry Irons, again, one of my favorite characters in comics, is called to the hospital to kind of help with the superheroes that are coming in, or pretty much trying to help out where he can help, trying to rescue and save the superheroes from some very, very serious injuries, everything like that. Now,
and these are the heroes that came back with Alan Scott from his space mission.
correct.
Important.
Now, we lead to another superhero that I know Mary enjoys.
Yes. So, upon arriving at St. Camillus, which is the hospital, John Henry Irons is introduced to Dr. Peter Cross, aka Dr. Mid-Nite, who is blind, which is why he is always wearing those sunglasses. He's so cool. I don't even really know how to explain him to you. He's just wonderful. I highly recommend reading JSA comics. He and Alan's dynamic is a delight. But Peter is a specialist in metahuman medical care, which is a very needed field in the DC universe. And so what they're really looking at is they're kind of talking about Lex's proposed metagene announcement. And they're asking about what happened to Hawk Girl. John Henry Irons does. And Alan begins to sort of talk about the weight of this mission, especially when they see Cyborg and Firestorm melded together through molecular fusion.
Now, I want to mention this because this is like one of the weirdest fusions you have ever seen in comics. And it's very brutal the way they draw.
Gruesome.
Yeah, it just shows you how the Zeta Beam, which we will go into the character that deals with the Zeta Beam soon, really can screw up a lot of characters. And you will see this in this issue. Like, Hawk Girl's 25 feet tall. You know, you have these two guys. You know, you notice Alan Scott's now missing an eye. There's just so many things that you see that it's like, oh, wow, this Zeta Beam really screwed them up.
And part of what makes this especially gruesome to me, I don't know how much Firestorm lore you know, but Firestorm is a matrix, which means there are two characters in Firestorm and Cyborg. And the character that's fused into the Firestorm matrix is literally just riding shotgun. The poor soul is just along for the ride, and they are now stuck like that.
Yeah, because usually it's Ronnie Raymond now at these points and Professor Stein.
Yes.
And then
Stein is a disembodied soul that lives in space and then becomes part of the Firestorm Matrix. But Martin, this is definitely not the Firestorm of his day.
Yes. Now, we noticed that Steele's asking, you know, of course, you know, what's going on or what happened during this time. He's pretty much going to Alan Scott, like, what happened? Why are all these heroes coming back dismembered, having missing parts, fused together, growing 25 feet tall? What happened? Now, what was it? And we also turn to Mal Duncan. Now, Mary, you want to explain what Mal Duncan is?
So Mal Duncan was one of the Teen Titans. I believe he's going by Vox now. Started out as Guardian, became Herald and Hornblower. I'm most familiar with him as Herald. Well, I'm actually most familiar with him from Roy Harper's band Great Frog, but where he's the trumpet player. But Mal is one of those lesser known Teen Titans characters who can deal a lot of damage through the sonic blast from his horn. Um, super, super cool. Definitely deserves more of a spotlight. Um, but he is not doing well at all. During the Zeta Beam accident, where even Alan Scott says, I don't know what happened. And Alan Scott has been doing the hero business for longer than pretty much anyone at this point. But he is essentially fusing with Red Tornado.
And
but his body is rejecting the technology. His immune system is rejecting it, and they can't operate the apparatus without removing Mal's lungs.
And so this is where we find out this is why John Henry Irons has been called in. And the reason being is that Dr. Mid-Nite pretty much states, he's reading a paper that John Henry Irons wrote, and it's about pseudodites. I'm hoping I say that correctly. I don't know.
Pseudocites.
Pseudocites. Thank you. Pretty much, I know Mary and I discussed this before the podcast, that this is pretty much artificial machine or, pretty much fusing together with humans. And we find out that this is part of John Henry Irons. He has the pseudodites, or he has tested that on him.
And the way it's described, it operates a little bit like stem cell technology made out of artificial flesh.
And like he says, it's pretty much human tissue, artificial flesh, like she said. And fact being that, Dr. Mid-Nite asks, didn't I hear you stopped wearing your costume when we spoke last week? You said there was something you wanted to talk about. And he goes, maybe when I'm not busy. But as for the armor, I guess I figured it would inspire more confidence. So you see that he's even trying to be that hero to try to show that, what, we're all here for each other no matter what, and try to inspire hope, just like Superman before him. We kind of go to him,
and there's
questioning Alan Scott more and actually asking him.
Yes, and this is actually my favorite part of this issue. Alan's consistent reiteration of there's no sound in space. And this is poignant for me, especially as they're standing over the bedside of Mal Duncan, who's a hero known for sound. Especially as he's laying there dying of a lung infection. Says, you've been on space missions, John. It all happens so fast with no up and no down and no sound. There's no sound in space. And we find out that the eye that Alan Scott has left isn't even his own. But even he's saying, whatever happened, I got off light. There was no sound, but we had telepathic connection. He sort of details just everything that went wrong with the Zeta Beam. The Zeta Beam was not what it was supposed to be. It was like it was refracted, or
right.
In some way. I think he says something went wrong. It was splintered, like a ray of light sent through a prism.
Right.
And the different beams shot out and affected different members of the team in different ways. It's what caused the fusion of Cyborg and Firestorm. Presumably, it's what made Hawkgirl grow to 25 feet.
But this is also where we find where Mal Duncan's machine part is coming from, and that is from Red Tornado,
who was holding him at the time of the blast.
Yes. Now, mind you, these are not all the heroes we see here. We also see Supergirl, we see Animal Man, we see Adam Strange, which I'll mention right now. Adam Strange, if anybody does not know who he is, think of Buzz Lightyear in the DC universe. He's an archaeologist, pretty much came across, what was it? pretty much he was digging one day, came across a Zeta beam that was allowed him to travel to the planet Ran. This is where he finds his wife, of course. They have a kid, which at that time was not normal. Having kids on their planet was very rare. So having Adam Strange and his wife bear a daughter was like miraculous to their world. And of course, he has to go back to Earth. So every time he tries to chase the Zeta beam to go back to his family. There's some great storylines with him. There are some terrible storylines with him, but this story is actually pretty unique with him. So
Yeah, we also see here on this large spread Starfire and Animal Man, and there's a Bumblebee. There's just a whole group of them. But in what John Henry Irons, in between, while Alan is talking, he is turning to Dr. Mid-Nite and talking about the pseudosites, how they'll self-replicate and shut down parts of Mal's immune system that are causing the rejection of this graft, but they might need to get charged, which indicates that there might be some sort of malfunction. And we see, again, I mentioned that Alan Scott is not great with emotions. He's emotionally constipated and he's doing his best. But we see him close to tears. And he says, a man shouldn't have to mourn his own children, should he? We shouldn't have to bury our children. And he starts listing heroes younger than him, which is everyone on his team. He says, I think the Zeta beam tore them apart like it did the Red Tornado. I lost them. I lost them all. And then he keeps going, I've lived 100 lives. I think of all the young heroes I've met, all the brave faces. He says, I give my life to bring even one of them back. And then he apologizes for having emotions and says, I don't usually make a fool of myself like this. And then he mentions a hero we didn't see in that spread. His daughter Jade, who didn't make it back either. And Alan is not part of why he's not always present in his children's lives or the best father to them is Alan Scott has made waves in DC Comics for being one of the first gay superheroes. And his children are from a compet marriage that was not the best for him or his wife. And he's not always been the most understanding to his children. They do take after his wife in many regards. But he definitely, personally, I think he favors Jade. There are some people who think he favors Todd. I think he favors Jade. I think there's more textual evidence for it. But he's clearly having a very hard time. And John Henry Irons suggests that he goes to counseling. And this is where we see more of those examples of Alan not being great about mental health, which is a consistent part of his characterization. It's why he has so many issues with his son Todd. He says counseling. It's my job to set an example. I have to show we don't break like other people.
And at this point, this is where Dr. Mid-Nite screams, of course, the fact being that Mal is going into cardiac arrest pretty much. So what happens is, of course, Alan, of course, goes right to CPR, tries to help out whatever way he can, and still decides, I'm going to take it in my own hands, go to the nearest power box, sticks his hand inside, and he says, given to fate, never, stand back, please. And he charges Red Tornado's little fusion with Mal Duncan just by electricity. What's interesting, though, is he yells out when he wakes up, it's coming, 52, 52, passes out.
And then passes out.
And, of course, was that some kind of playback? And then we find out from Alan Scott that was Red Tornado's last words. And then, of course, Dill's questioning what's going on.
And now to Renee Montoya.
Yeah, so that ends that whole scene. We don't talk about Still anymore now for a while. Not for a little while. We go to Renee Montoya. This is going to be a quick little sum it up scene. Renee Montoya, of course, her old captain comes to visit her to check in on her and to really kind of go over the story that she gave her during that night with the question with the monster in the basement at 520 Kane Street. pretty much the whole conclusion, just to sum this up really quickly, is pretty much tells her, stay out of this. You're not a detective anymore. You've lost all your rights there. Stay out of this and we'll take care of this. Of course, Renee Montoya goes, nah, I don't think so. She, of course, didn't say it out loud, but she's like, I'm going to take care of this now. And that ends her scene. It's a very quick scene. I thought it was kind of the way the writing went. It was kind of like, why did you do this little scene right when this is happening with Mal? And it was just a bad timing for it. And then we go to day 7. This ends the issue here.
Yes. So day 7 is where we see some of these missing heroes.
Yeah.
These are some of the heroes that were on Alan Scott's space mission. But it starts with Red Tornado's floating hand.
Yes.
Which I love.
I noticed that
and
questioning it. I was like,
and we see it looks like paradise. And Starfire even says so. We see Animal Man and Starfire who are bathing in this beautiful creek with a waterfall, and well, Animal Man is staring lovingly at a picture of his wife and child, and Starfire is taking a bath, but semantics.
I'm
And
not gonna lie.
they're
This is why I don't like Starfire. It is just one of those characters I just don't care, because it's over sexualizing her, and it just makes me so mad with this character a lot. And just
it's
seeing,
the way that she's drawn that it's like the inherent sexism of like the industry. But her character itself is incredible. It's just they try to make her like a character she's not in how she's drawn. It's very frustrating. Um, but I mean, Buddy is really kind of going, this is the first time I've been marooned on an alien planet, and it's kind of freaking me out. It's like, have you noticed the sun's been setting for about 2 weeks now? I'm not used to that. um, and then we see Adam Strange trying to fix their spaceship.
now,
I say trying because he's not doing very well.
yeah,
And also he has no eyes.
exactly the point. It's sad because even though, and we'll find out in these next issues, even though without eyes, Adam Strange is not a dummy. This guy knows what he's doing at points. Now, granted, he's not doing the best with the ship and trying to get them off this planet, but it's pretty much the whole thing of, he pretty much says, like, I got us into this. I promise you, I'm going to get you out of this. And none of that's changed priceless, eyes or no eyes. And that's when you see that little scene with his 2 missing eyes. And, but here's the thing, Animal Man senses something. Now, this is one of his powers, that he can sense either creatures or anything around him. And he pretty much states, if you think you can fondle that spaceship back to life, be my guest. All I'm saying is I've been using my super senses to probe the planet's morphic field network. And guess what? There's a serpent in paradise, guys. I'm not trying to alarm anybody, but I have a feeling we should get off this planet before the sun goes down, because we're not alone. And that's when you see 2 glowing eyes. At this point, we don't know who it is. It is a character in the DC universe, but we're going to get into that later on. But this ends the 52 week. Now we go into the history of the DCU, part 4 this week, actually. So, which picks up Infinite Crisis. Sorry,
we're once again looking at the death of Supergirl. How many times can we look at it? Excellent question. This art is everywhere. And we're really looking at the Anti-Monitor. This time, though, we're also getting the death of Barry Allen. But we're not really seeing Wally West take up the mantle for quite some time in this. It's not ever said directly that he's taking it up.
right.
Says the remaining universe survived and prospered. Heroes were reborn, and the convergence erased all knowledge of the details of the Great Crisis, except from the mind of one man. Again, this is just basic, different multiverse stuff, things that you've definitely seen if you've read any of the larger DC events of the last 50 years.
Just looking at the art again, like I was just troubled with, again, the Flash death. It really just comes to me every time I see it, and it just makes me appreciate Barry for the hero he is, but then why bring him back for after such a heroic sacrifice? That's what always makes me so mad with him, because it's like, or DC Comics, like, he went out such a hero to save the world or save all these universes, and yet you bring him back like nothing. And it was just something that still disappoints me to this very day.
And then you bring him back, and then you give him his nephew's characteristics to make him popular.
Yeah. It was just so bad after this. And, of course, Donna Troy, of course, says, after learning about the Flash death, that didn't end the threat. And it's like she says, this is where you see all these groups superheroes come to face off against the Anti-Monitor for pretty much one final strike. It's pretty much up to them at this point to either defeat him, or all multiverses are going to be destroyed. And it takes, I think it's Earth 2 Superman, if I'm not mistaken, that ends up defeating him.
That sounds right, but it's been a while since I've read it, so I don't want to say for sure.
Because this is the heroes that actually kind of go off and, like, somewhat kind of, they call it, I'm trying to find the word here. The heroes of Earth 1 and those left from Earth 2 paralleled and found a new home on New Earth that collapsed their histories into one. Which I know there's some good things that come out of that part, and there are some bad things that come out of that part, especially with the Justice Society. Yeah, so, but some redundancies, like Earth 2 Superman and Lois Lane, and Earth Prime's Superboy, and Earth 3's Alexander Luthor had nowhere to go but the abyss. Alex Luthor used the antimatter powers to find them a home and everlasting peace. Or so it was thought. The remaining universe survived and prospered. Heroes, so on and so forth. Mary's already covered that part. But this is where it leads into Infinite Crisis, because this is where you see these 4 people who went off into paradise, or what they thought, come back and pretty much almost destroy reality as it is. But we'll get to that point later on. I think this is a great point to jump off this week. If you are interested in learning our other issues, please go back, listen into them, enjoy the series as we continue going on through this series. Mary and I will be continue going on through every issue from here on out, including World War III, which will be near the end of the year. Yeah, and listen to Comic Talkers anywhere on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify. You can find us out on YouTube now at Comic Talkers, where this will be premiering. Along with, you can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for all the latest updates, and keep us for some fun content coming out soon. So without further ado, my name is Brandon.
And I'm Mary.
May comics always be the top of your discussion.